3 fake HOA cops came to arrest a black man at his own house, but what they didn't know, he was the most feared Navy SEAL in the country, and when they pushed too far, he turned his quiet home into a battlefield they'd never forget. On. A quiet Saturday morning in a suburban neighborhood, David Carter sat on his porch sipping coffee. At 50, David had retired from the Navy SEALs after 2 decades of intense service. To the neighbors, he was just another homeowner, quiet, reserved, and always keeping his yard in perfect order. Few knew about the dangerous missions he had led or the enemies he had faced around the world. That morning his peace was interrupted by 3 men in matching uniforms walking confidently up his driveway. Their navy blue shirts bore the letters HOA Security in bold print, and each wore a fake badge that gleamed under the sun. They didn't bother with greetings or introductions. "You." "David Carter?" One of them barked, his hand resting on what looked like a holstered weapon. "Yes," David replied evenly, standing up. "You're in violation of several HOA rules," the leader sneered. "We're here to place you under arrest and escort you off this property." David raised an eyebrow. "Arrest? For what exactly?" His calm tone carried an undertone of steel. The second man waved a stack of papers. "Unpaid dues, unsanctioned renovations, and refusal to comply with regulations. You've ignored every notice. Time's up." David's sharp eyes scanned the documents. He instantly noticed inconsistencies, no official HOA letterhead, misspellings, and signatures that didn't match. These weren't real officers of anything, just imposters playing a dangerous game. "I see," David said, placing his coffee cup down carefully. His mind shifted gears, recalling countless encounters where deception came before danger. The leader stepped closer, smirking. "Don't make this hard, old man. Come quietly." What they didn't know was that they had just picked a fight with the wrong man, one whose very name still sent shivers through adversaries across the world. David straightened his posture, his expression unreadable. The street was still calm, but a storm was about to erupt. David stood tall on his porch, his eyes fixed on the 3 fake HOA cops. They expected him to panic, maybe plead, but instead he radiated an unsettling calm. Years of combat training had conditioned him to remain steady, under pressure, and this situation was no different. If anything, it felt laughably small compared to what he had faced overseas. "You boys sure you know what you're doing?" David asked slowly, his voice firm but quiet. The leader scoffed. "We don't have time for games. Step down from the porch. Now." The second man adjusted his belt nervously, his eyes darting around as though he knew something wasn't right. The third, younger and overconfident, smirked while tapping the handle of his baton against his palm. Instincts sharpened. He recognized the bluff in their posture, the uncertainty behind their bravado. They weren't trained law enforcement, just reckless men trying to intimidate someone they thought was vulnerable. "You flash fake badges, wave phony paperwork, and think you can force people out of their homes?" David said, stepping forward. His voice carried weight, like a commander addressing soldiers. "That's not how this works." The leader's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly covered it with anger. "Last warning, Carter. Don't test us." David took another deliberate step, closing the distance. His gaze locked on the leader's eyes, unflinching. "If you knew who I was, you'd be running right now." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Their plan had been simple: scare an older man, take control, and maybe profit from it. But something about David, his steady voice, his piercing stare, was unraveling their confidence. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed the leader's face. But instead of backing down, he barked louder. "Grab him!" And in that instant, David Carter knew it was time to remind them why even enemies overseas had once called him the ghost they feared. The 3 fake HOA cops advanced up the porch steps, their heavy boots thudding against the wood. David remained perfectly still, his hands at his sides, watching every movement with surgical precision. To them, he looked unarmed, vulnerable, exactly what they wanted. But they were seconds away from realizing their mistake. The youngest one lunged first, baton raised high. David moved faster than their eyes could follow. He sidestepped, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted with controlled force. The baton clattered to the ground as the man yelped in pain. With one fluid motion, David pushed him back, sending him sprawling into the bushes. The leader cursed and charged forward, pulling out what looked like a taser. David's hand shot out, smacking the weapon aside before it could spark. A swift knee to the gut doubled the man over, leaving him gasping for air. The third man hesitated, his confidence melting into panic. He reached for something under his vest, but David was already on him. In 2 quick steps, David disarmed him and pinned him against the porch railing. His voice was cold, steady and commanding. "You're not cops, you're not OA, you're con men playing dress-up, and you just picked the wrong house." The leader groaned from the ground, clutching his stomach. You don't know who we work for." David leaned closer, tightening his grip on the pinned man's arm. "I don't care who you work for. What I do care about is why you thought you could come here pretending to be law enforcement." The man trembled, sweat beading on his forehead. We were told you'd be easy. Just an old guy living alone." David's eyes narrowed. Someone had set this up. This wasn't just random harassment, it was planned. And whoever was behind it had no idea that David Carter was far from easy. The fake cop David had pinned against the railing squirmed, his face pale from both fear and pain. David's grip didn't waver. Years of interrogations in hostile territories had taught him how to apply just enough pressure to make a man talk, without breaking him too soon. "Who sent you?" David demanded, his voice low but edged with steel. The leader, still doubled over on the porch, coughed and spat to the side. You wouldn't understand. It's bigger than you." David's jaw tightened. Bigger than him? That phrase stirred a familiar memory from his SEAL days. Organized crime groups, mercenaries, even corrupt officials. He had faced them all, and they always thought they were untouchable. The man pinned to the railing stammered, We were paid, just told to scare you, make you leave the house." "By who?" David pressed. "I don't know names," the man pleaded. "It was just orders. Said you'd be easy to handle. Said you wouldn't fight back." David's cold stare pierced him. "They lied to you." At that, David released him just enough for the man to stumble forward, gasping. He didn't strike again. Discipline kept him from unnecessary brutality, but he made sure the 3 understood exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. "Listen." "Carefully," David said, standing tall. "This house is mine. I fought for the right to live in peace. If you, or whoever sent you, try this again, you won't walk away so lucky next time." The youngest, still nursing his twisted wrist from the bushes, muttered under his breath, "You're crazy." David's eyes flicked toward him, sharp as a blade. "No, I'm prepared. There's a difference." The street was still eerily quiet, but David knew this was only the beginning. Someone had orchestrated this charade, and they would come again. Only this time, David would be ready. David stood on his porch after the imposters had staggered away, his coffee long gone cold. The neighborhood seemed peaceful again, kids' bikes leaning against driveways, sprinklers watering manicured lawns, but beneath the quiet, he could feel it. Trouble wasn't over, it was just beginning. He walked back inside, locking the door with practiced care. His home was modest, but inside one room remained untouched since his military days. David flicked on the light, revealing a wall of neatly organized gear, old tactical packs, training manuals, and photographs of his SEAL team. Faces stared back at him, brothers he had fought beside, some alive, some long gone. "Someone still thinks I'm a target," he muttered. Memories resurfaced, uninvited. Missions in the Middle East, jungle operations in South America, covert work where enemies disappeared without a trace. David's name had been whispered among foreign fighters with fear. The Phantom SEAL, they called him. If he was on your trail, you never saw him coming. But now, years later, someone dared send amateurs to his door. Why? Sat at his desk, pulled a small notepad closer, and began jotting possibilities. Debt collection scam. Organized crime front. Or something bigger. Then a darker thought struck him. During his service, David had made powerful enemies. Cartels, warlords, even rogue operatives. Could one of them have tracked him down after all these years? Leaned back, exhaling slowly. "If they're testing me, they'll find out quick I haven't lost my edge." His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number flashed across the screen. "Leave the house, Carter. Next time, we won't send fakes." David's eyes hardened. This wasn't random harassment. This was personal, and whoever was pulling the strings had just declared war. David stared at the glowing screen, the text message still fresh. His instincts screamed, that this wasn't just intimidation, it was reconnaissance. The fake Hoa cops had been a test, probing his reaction, measuring how easily he could be pushed. Now, the real threat loomed closer. He typed back nothing. Silence was a weapon he had mastered long ago. Let them think he was rattled. Let them underestimate him further. Instead, he powered down the phone, slipped it into a drawer, and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the street looked the same, peaceful, ordinary, but to David, it was a battlefield in disguise. Every parked car, every passerby could be a lookout. He picked up his landline and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After several rings, a gruff voice answered, "You've reached Miller." "Still watching My Six, old friend?" David asked. There was a pause. "Carter? Damn, it's been ages. What's going on?" David explained only the essentials, the imposters, the fake arrest, the threatening text. Miller, a fellow SEAL turned private investigator, whistled low. "Sounds like someone setting the board. And you, my friend, are the king piece they want to topple." "Find out who sent them," David said firmly, quietly. "I'll hold the line here. You got it. But Carter, be careful. Ghosts from our past have long memories." David hung up and returned to his living room. He crouched, sliding a small floor panel open, and retrieved a metal case. Inside rested his old sidearm, perfectly cleaned, and a combat knife still sharp as the day he carried it into missions. He strapped the knife to his belt and chambered around into the pistol. The message had been received. But David Carter wasn't leaving his house. If they wanted a fight, he'd make sure they regretted knocking on his door. Night fell over the neighborhood, cloaking the quiet streets in shadows. Porch lights flickered on, sprinklers hissed, and families retreated into their homes. To everyone else, it was just another evening. To David, it was the calm before another storm. He killed every light inside his house and moved like a ghost from window to window, observing. His training kicked in, controlled breathing, minimal movement, eyes scanning for anomalies. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Then he saw it. Black SUV parked 2 houses down, engine off, no movement inside. Too clean, too deliberate. He recognized the type, civilian shell hiding something tactical. No neighbor owned it. Sloppy, David muttered. Whoever was watching him didn't know he could spot surveillance from a mile away. He went upstairs, opened a locked chest, and pulled out a compact pair of night vision binoculars. Peering through them, he saw silhouettes inside the SUV. 3 men sitting unnaturally still, eyes fixed in his direction, professionals, or at least better trained than the imposters. David's mind calculated options: confront them, call the police, or wait. Calling the police wasn't his style. Cops couldn't handle what was coming. Instead, he slipped into his backyard, moving silently across the grass. Every step was deliberate, every shadow a shield. Within minutes he was at the tree line bordering the cul-de-sac, positioning himself for a better angle on the SUV. He crouched low and listened. The faint crackle of a radio confirmed his suspicion. They weren't random thugs. This was a coordinated operation. Suddenly, one of the men inside the SUV lifted a camera with a telephoto lens, snapping photos of his house. Another scribbled notes on a clipboard. David's jaw tightened. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was surveillance, a setup. And if they were gathering intel on him, then someone powerful wanted him gone. But they had overlooked one thing. David Carter wasn't the hunted. He was the hunter. David crouched in the shadows, his heartbeat steady, his eyes locked on the SUV. The men inside thought they were invisible, but David had spent years dismantling surveillance teams more skilled than this. They were making rookie mistakes. Windows cracked too far for covert observation, radios too loud, posture too stiff. He decided to make the first move. Slipping through the backyards, David circled behind the SUV. His steps were silent, blending seamlessly into the night. He came up on the vehicle's blind side, crouched low, and listened. "Boss." "Says we hit him by morning," one of the men said through the open window. "Tonight's just recon." David's eyes narrowed. So they weren't amateurs after all. They were staging for a bigger strike. Without hesitation, he moved. His hand shot forward, yanking the rear door open. The man inside barely had time to react before David dragged him out, slammed him against the asphalt, and clamped a hand over his mouth. "Shh," David whispered coldly. "You make a sound, you won't get another chance." The other two inside the SUV froze, startled. By the time they reached for their weapons, David had already pressed the muzzle of his pistol to the pinned man's temple. "Step out." Slowly, David ordered, his voice calm but commanding. The two men hesitated, then obeyed, raising their hands, their eyes flickered with fear. This wasn't how surveillance targets were supposed to behave. David's gaze was sharp, predatory. "Who's pulling the strings?" One of them tried to bluff. "You're in over your head, old man. Walk away while you can." David's grip tightened. Wrong answer. The pinned man whimpered under his hold, and the others tensed, realizing David wasn't bluffing. He wasn't just defending himself, he was dismantling their operation piece by piece. For the first time, the hunters realized they were the prey, and the Navy SEAL they had underestimated was just getting started. The man pinned under David's arm trembled, sweat dripping down his forehead. The two standing outside the SUV looked torn, fight or comply. David's cold, unflinching gaze gave them the answer. "Talk," David ordered. "Who sent you?" Silence. One of them shifted nervously, his hand twitching near his hip, but David spotted the movement instantly. "Don't," he warned, pressing the pistol tighter to the pinned man's head. "You make a move. Your buddy here doesn't walk away." The second man finally spoke. We don't have a name, just orders. We were told you'd be soft, retired, out of shape, living quiet. But you're not." His voice faltered. "You're not what we were told." David's lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. "That's your first smart observation." He shoved the pinned man toward the others and stepped back, weapon steady. "You tell your boss this. If he wants me out, he'll have to come himself. No more decoys, no more kids playing dress-up." The men exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't used to being dismissed like amateurs, but David's presence was suffocating, commanding, leaving them no choice but to nod. "Get in your car," David said flatly. "Leave, now." They scrambled to obey, dragging their shaken comrade back into the SUV. Within seconds, the engine roared to life, tires squealing as they sped off into the night. David lowered his weapon but didn't relax. He knew how this game worked. They'd report back, their boss would be furious, and the next wave wouldn't be surveillance. It would be an attack. He walked back to his porch, holstering his pistol. For years he had kept his past buried, his name fading into legend. But tonight, shadows from that past had come crawling back. David Carter, the most feared Navy SEAL, was being hunted again, and he was ready to show them why men once whispered his name like a ghost story. The night dragged on, quiet but tense. David sat inside his darkened living room, the pistol resting on the table beside him. He didn't bother sleeping. He knew the men in the SUV would return, and next time they wouldn't come for surveillance. He spent the hours preparing his home like a battlefield. He wasn't reckless, he was deliberate. Windows were reinforced, choke points identified, escape routes mapped. His years as a SEAL taught him one thing above all: control the environment and you control the fight. By dawn, he had rigged subtle defenses, nothing lethal, but enough to slow intruders. Fishing line across the back entry to trip them, mirrors positioned to give him angles of approach, and lights wired to create sudden disorientation if needed. At 6 a.m., his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, the message was shorter, colder. "You had your chance. Tonight, we finish this. David." Exhaled slowly. "Good," he muttered. "Come finish it." Later that afternoon, Miller called back. "Carter, I did some digging. Word is a private contractor. Ex-military, dirty as they come, is behind this. Goes by the name Kruger. He's got money, connections, and a grudge." "Ring any bells?" David's eyes darkened. "Kruger," he repeated. Memories surged, missions gone bad, a teammate betrayed, enemies paid off. Kruger had been always lurking in the shadows, and now, it seemed, he wanted revenge. "Sounds like he's making it personal," Miller warned. "It already is," David replied. As the sun dipped, David stood at his window watching the street. Every sound, the hum of a car, the bark of a dog felt like a warning. He wasn't afraid, but his instincts were razor-sharp. Tonight wouldn't be a bluff. Tonight, the real fight would come crashing to his doorstep. And David Carter wasn't planning to survive it. He was planning to win it. Darkness cloaked the neighborhood once more, but tonight the air was different. Charged, heavy, waiting. David crouched near the front window, weapon in hand, every muscle coiled and ready. He could feel them out there, predators circling. At 11 p.m., the first sign appeared. Headlights off, a black van rolled silently down the street and stopped a few houses away. Doors slid open and shadows spilled out. 6 men in tactical gear, their movements disciplined and deliberate. Not amateurs this time. Professionals. Kruger's men. David's. Jaw clenched. Finally. The men fanned out, 2 circling to the back, 2 moving toward the side windows, and 2 advancing straight for the front door. Their weapons gleamed faintly in the moonlight. David waited until the first man's boot touched his porch. Then, click. The hidden tripwire snapped tight, sending the intruder crashing into the railing with a grunt. In the moment of confusion, David moved like lightning. He fired a controlled shot into the porch light, plunging the entryway into darkness. "Contact!" one of the attackers hissed. Gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the air. But David was already gone, sliding into the shadows of his own home, moving with ghost-like precision. He knew every inch of the house, they didn't. That was his advantage. The 2 men at the side windows tried forcing their way in, but as they pushed forward, a blinding flash from David's rigged floodlight disoriented them. By the time they regained their vision, David had slipped behind one and slammed him into the wall, knocking him unconscious. Inside, the other intruders crept forward cautiously, whispering into radios. "He's in here somewhere." David's voice cut through the silence from the shadows. "You boys picked the wrong house." Fear flickered in their eyes. Because in that moment, they realized they weren't hunting a retired man. They were trapped inside the lair of a Navy SEAL. The house fell into silence, broken only by the creak of boots against hardwood. The intruders swept their flashlights across the darkened walls, their beams slicing through shadows. But David wasn't where they expected. He was everywhere and nowhere, the ghost that had haunted war zones, and now his own living room. The first man to round the corner never saw it coming. David stepped out from the blind spot, grabbed him by the vest, and slammed him to the floor with bone-cracking force. His weapon clattered away, and a sharp elbow strike finished the fight. "Man down!" one of the others shouted, panic leaking into his voice. Gunfire erupted again, shredding drywall and splintering furniture. David stayed low, moving with surgical precision. He popped up only long enough to fire 2 controlled shots, dropping another attacker with brutal efficiency. The last 3 regrouped in the hallway, nerves fraying. "He's just one man," their leader barked. "Not. Just one man," another muttered, fear gripping him. "He's him." David's reputation had preceded him, and now they knew the stories were true. He struck again, silent, decisive. From the shadows he disarmed one, flipped him hard against the wall, and pressed his knife to the man's throat. "Tell Kruger," he whispered, "that I'm done hiding." With one swift motion he knocked the man unconscious. The final 2 broke, rushing for the exit. David didn't chase. He let them flee, their terror carrying the message better than any bullet could. As the night grew quiet once more, David stood in the ruins of his living room, chest rising steady, eyes sharp. He holstered his weapon and whispered to himself, "War's not over, Carter. It just came home." And somewhere out there, Kruger was waiting. But now Kruger knew. The most feared Navy SEAL wasn't retired. He was ready for battle.